most Americans agree that we need policing reforms, and there's a very obvious reason why those reforms have never happened: political money. Talk about this. Talk about the police. You know, you would think they would understand what's sincere and what's not. Tell me about this. Nancy Pelosi gets this money from the police unions, right? Then she turns around and does what?
Well, aside from the ridiculous photo op, she does absolutely nothing. She does absolutely nothing. You know, the relief bill or the reform bill, excuse me, that we saw earlier this week, it includes almost nothing that isn't already codified in state laws across this country. You know, they made the chokehold illegal. Okay, well, the chokehold's already illegal. We might get rid of qualified immunity. Well, some states have already done that, and there are certain limitations on it already, so that's not a whole heck of a lot. But
there's no big change. Your point,
right. It's all performance art.
Well, okay, the performance art. How ridiculous did Democratic leadership look, dressed up in African garb, on their knees? The African. Did you see this photo? It's unbelievable. The worst thing about it is this 80-year-old woman couldn't even get up after she had been on her knees, looking like a total buffoon. The African-American community has reacted to it. They said, "How dare you think we are this stupid? How dare you?" And she's doing the same thing with the police officers. "How dare you think we're this stupid, Nancy Pelosi, Chuck Schumer, idiots running the Democratic leadership?" Doesn't that kind of set up what you're talking about here?
Well, it does. And the Center for Responsive Politics, who tracks money in politics at all levels here, they've come out and said, listen, we know everybody wants reforms. The polls have increased by, I think, 20% in the last week on that. This is universal. But they're saying, listen, the Democrats are trying to sell you one thing, but follow the money. You have to follow the money. Most of this police union money, most of the police super PAC money is going to Democrats in Congress and in the Senate. And that's what's preventing real reform from taking place at the national level.
So this is a facade. Your point is the whole Nancy, the idiot show that we saw with her down on her knees with Schumer dressed up in African garb. If I were, the reaction is exactly what you would think. How dare you think we're this stupid? But they do think that. Now, apparently they think the same thing with police officers, right?
They do, and that's also part of the problem. Everybody in D.C. thinks they're the smartest person in the room. They think they can always have the cake and eat it too here. We're going to pay lip service over here, pay lip service over there. But at the end of the day, we're always going to do whatever's going to help my next campaign. That is where it is. You know, the Black Lives Matter, the protesters, they're not the ones funding these politicians. The people calling for reforms, they're not funding these politicians. So they're unlikely to get what they want from the current people, the current leadership in D.C. They want what they want to happen. They know what to do, and that is get rid of the leadership that's there now,
it's
or else it'll never happen.
A disastrous bunch of leadership. They've got to. Farron Cousins, thank you for joining me, okay?
Thank you.
Dozens of identifiable, heavily armed law enforcement officials have been spotted at protests across the country over the past 2 weeks. RT's Brigida Santos joins me to talk about who are they, what's going on. Is this America's new secret police? Brigida, lay this story out. This is a remarkable story.
I mean, it's absolutely crazy now. Heavily armed men were spotted at protests in Washington, D.C. following the police killing of George Floyd. The men were in uniform, but they had no identifiable badges or department markings. When reporters asked them to identify themselves, they then refused to answer. Now, according to Attorney General William Barr, the federal officials came from the Bureau of Prisons Special Operations Response Teams, which he'd summoned to monitor the unrest. Unlike members of the military, federal law enforcement officers are not required to wear identifiable uniforms. But their presence confused demonstrators and members of the media who were not sure whether the men were actually real law enforcement officers or just guys wearing costumes. Law enforcement experts criticized the decision to send unidentifiable feds to monitor crowds, calling the move very concerning. By deploying secret police to the streets, citizens have no way to identify officers who engage in misconduct while representing the federal government.
Yeah, police and other departments around the country have also been hiding their badges. Where's this happened and why is it happening? What's your take?
Well, videos from recent protests show officers covering their badge numbers and names with black bands, which police say is a mourning ritual to honor fallen officers. But many police departments don't allow officers to intentionally hide identifying information. So when these officers were asked why they'd covered their badges, they often said it was an accident. They claimed that the mourning badges had slipped, or their mourning bands had slipped, but many officers were also spotted with tape covering their badges, and others had removed their badges altogether. Now, this was not an isolated problem. You can see videos of this happening from officers in New York, Seattle, and Chicago, to name a few cities. This made it nearly impossible for protesters to identify those officers who attacked them while they were peacefully protesting, as we saw video after video of over the last 2 weeks.
You know, a disturbing incident at the protest in San Diego last week has gone viral. The video shows a group of men pushing a woman into an unmarked car and driving off. Who were these people?
Well, apparently they were officers. Now, they were dressed in plainclothes and military-style uniforms with no identifying markers. They were caught on video arresting a female protester and hauling her away in an unmarked van as her friends screamed at the men to identify themselves. Take a look.
No, she did not.
We watched her.
She put her hand up. She put her hand up.
All right, I'm right here, I'm right here.
She's gonna come with us.
Don't hurt her. No, don't hurt her.
Hey, she's
Don't
not getting hurt.
Okay,
She's getting hands up.
why are you putting a flashlight in her face? Why are you putting it on her?
She's getting hurt.
Yo, what the f***? In an unmarked car? This is an unmarked car. Who is this? Who are you?
You follow us, you will get shot. You understand me?
What is happening?
Where's she going? Where's she going?
Where are you taking her? Where? You have to tell us where you're taking her. Where are you going? Where are you going? Help us! Help us! Who is this?
As you heard there, the unmarked officers are then shown yelling at the woman's friends, quote, "If you follow us, you will get shot. Do you understand me?" This is incredibly frightening, and it really looks like a kidnapping because there's absolutely no way to know whether these undercover police are legitimate law enforcement officers. They don't identify themselves when they're asked to. They don't show their badges. For all this woman's friends knew, they could have been a random group of agitators hauling her off till the end of time. And once that video went viral, San Diego officials looked into it. They found the officers who said that they arrested her for allegedly swinging a cardboard sign at a passing officer on a motorcycle. But this is very disturbing. This is one of the reasons why people are protesting against police currently.
Brigida, thanks for joining me. Please keep up with the story. As a matter of fact, if we can do an update next week, I'd like to do it. Let's dig a little deeper into the story, okay? It almost sounds like a federal secret police, a state secret. This is not something you would want occurring in the U.S. Thank you for joining me, okay?
Thanks, Mike.